Your teenager just did something that made no sense to you. Maybe they said something sharp, something a little cruel, that the sweet kid you raised would never have said. Maybe they took a risk that made your stomach drop. Or maybe they just shut the door, again, and chose an hour on the phone with a friend over 10 minutes with you. And somewhere in the back of your mind, quiet but honest, was the thought almost every parent has: what is wrong with you? Here's the truth almost no parent is ever told. Nothing is wrong with them. What you're watching isn't bad character. It isn't a phase they're choosing to put you through. It's a specific, measurable event happening inside your teenager's skull, right now, tonight, while they scroll and laugh in the next room. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand your teenager better than you have in years. You might even feel a little guilty about some of the things you've said in the heat of the moment. Because this was never about attitude. It's about a brain that is, quite literally, still under construction. And one strange feature of that construction flips a switch the second their friends walk into the room. That switch is the real reason your teen turns to their friends instead of you. And once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. Let's start with a car. A 16-year-old is driving home, alone. And alone, they're careful. Textbook careful. Hands at 10 and 2, slowing at the yellow, checking the mirror twice. Now put 3 of their friends in that car. Same road, same driver, same brain. They run the light. Nothing changed on the outside. Everything changed on the inside. And for a long time, nobody could explain why. Now we can, and the explanation is going to change the way you see every choice your teenager makes. For most of human history, we told ourselves a simple story about teenagers. We assumed the brain was basically finished by the time you hit your teens. So, if a teenager did something reckless, thoughtless, baffling, well, that was just a bad choice. A character flaw. Something they grow out of. That story wasn't a little wrong. It was completely wrong. Because for the first time in history, we can look inside the living, thinking teenage brain. And what we found is that it isn't a finished thing making bad decisions. It's an unfinished thing, a construction site, mid-renovation, and the work is happening on a very specific, very deliberate schedule. To understand what's being built, it helps to think of the brain as something much simpler. Think of it as a car with 2 pedals. Every brain has 2 systems that matter here. The first is the accelerator. Deep in the brain sits the reward system, the part that chases excitement, novelty, thrill. It runs on a chemical called dopamine. And when it fires, the world feels vivid, electric, worth chasing. The second is the brakes. Right behind your forehead sits the prefrontal cortex. It's the planner, the part that weighs consequences, the part that says, wait, that imagines next Tuesday before you act today. In a healthy adult, these 2 are roughly matched. Accelerator, brakes, push and hold. But here's the thing about growing up that changes everything. These 2 systems do not finish at the same time. The accelerator comes online early. By the early teens, it isn't just working, it's turned up louder than it will ever be again in your child's entire life. Everything feels bigger. A crush feels like the whole sky. A song feels like it was written for them. An insult feels unbearable. And the brakes? The prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to fully mature. The research is remarkably consistent on this. It isn't finished until the mid-20s. Sit with that for a second. For about a decade, there is a gap. A powerful accelerator, wired and roaring, paired with a braking system that is still being installed. Psychologists call this the maturity gap. And once you see it, your teenager stops looking irrational and starts looking like exactly what they are, a fast car with the brakes not quite finished. But the pedals still don't explain the strangest part. They don't explain what happens the second a friend walks into the room. So a group of researchers set out to catch it happening, in real time. The lead scientist was Dr. Lawrence Steinberg, a developmental psychologist at Temple University, and one of the most respected voices in adolescent brain science in the world. Working with his colleague, Dr. Jason Chain, he built a driving game, a simulator, basically, where taking risks gets you home faster, but might crash you. He brought in 3 groups: teenagers, young adults, and adults. First, everyone played alone. Alone, the teenagers drove about as safely as the adults. No real difference. Then the researchers changed one thing, and only one thing. They told each person that their friends were now watching from the next room. Nobody was speaking. Nobody was daring anyone to do anything. The friends were just there. The adults drove exactly the same. Watched or not watched, it made no difference to them at all. The teenagers doubled their risk-taking. Just knowing their friends were nearby. That's it. And here's the part that turns this from a fun fact into something profound. Steinberg and Chine ran the experiment inside an fMRI scanner so they could watch the brain as it happened. And when the teenagers believed their peers were watching, the activation, that dopamine reward system, in a region called the ventral striatum, lit up harder. The presence of friends didn't change the teenagers' thinking, it changed their chemistry. For a teenage brain, the mere presence of peers floods the reward system. Suddenly, the risky thing isn't just tempting, it's glowing. Alone, that same choice looked ordinary. With an audience, it lights up like a jackpot. The friend in the passenger seat isn't giving advice. They're flooring the gas. And your teenager can feel it, whether anyone says a single word. By the way, if this is starting to make your own teenager make sense, do me a favor and hit subscribe. This channel breaks down the actual science of the teenage brain in a way that helps you parent instead of panic. And there's a lot more coming. You don't want to miss it. Okay, where were we? Right, we just watched friends flood a teenager's brain with reward, which raises the obvious question. Why would evolution build a brain like this? Why turn the accelerator up, delay the brakes, and then wire the whole thing to go a little haywire around friends? If this gets teenagers hurt, and sometimes it does, why is it built in? Because it isn't a flaw, it's the entire point. Go back with me, 200,000 years. Picture our ancestors on the African savanna. And picture what adolescence actually was for every single generation before ours. It was the age you had to do the single hardest thing a human ever does. Leave. Walk away from the family that kept you alive. Step into a world of strangers and build a whole new place for yourself among people your own age. That is terrifying. And you will not do a terrifying thing if your brain is wired to play it safe. So evolution did what evolution does. It tuned the teenage brain. It made the new world feel thrilling instead of frightening. It made risk feel worth taking. And above all, it made one thing matter more than almost anything else: what other young people think. Because on that savanna, peers weren't a distraction from survival. Your peers were the survival plan. As one leading researcher, Dr. Dan Siegel, puts it, for a young mammal, being cut off from the peer group was, in evolutionary terms, close to a death sentence. So that pull toward friends that feels like rejection to you, it's the oldest survival instinct your child has. And that sensitivity to peers we call peer pressure and treat like a weakness is actually one of the most sophisticated pieces of engineering in the entire human body. It's the mechanism that pulls a child out of the nest and turns them into an adult with a tribe of their own. Which finally answers the question you came here with. Why do they turn to their friends instead of you? Because their deepest developmental job right now is to build a self that is separate from you. The psychologist Erik Erikson called adolescence the stage of identity versus role confusion, the years when a young person has to answer the question, who am I? And they cannot fully answer it inside your house, under your rules, as your child. They have to go find out who they are somewhere else, with people who didn't know them when they were 7. That's what the closed bedroom door actually is. Not a wall against you, a construction site. The privacy, the secrecy, the "I'm fine," that's the sound of someone building an identity and needing a little space to do it. Turning toward their friends doesn't have to mean turning away from you, unless one thing goes wrong. And this is the warning. Here's what the research also shows, and what almost nobody tells parents. Friends are, in the short term, an incredible emotional tonic. In one study, teenagers who were with friends, or even just texting them, right after something stressful happened, reported less sadness, less worry, and more happiness than teens who were alone or with adults. In the moment, peers genuinely help. But there's a flip side. When a teenager starts leaning only on other teenagers for emotional support, kids whose own breaks aren't finished either, it can quietly become a source of real vulnerability. Research links turning to friends instead of parents too early and too completely with higher rates of depression, especially in girls. In other words, your teen needs their friends, but they still need you underneath. Not as the manager anymore, as the anchor, the stable, finished nervous system in the house. The secure base they can push off from and come back to when the water gets rough. Which raises the real question every parent is actually asking. How do you stay important when you're not the first person they run to anymore? Here's what the research on this is surprisingly clear about. First, stop interrogating. The instinct when a teenager goes quiet is to ask more questions. Where were you? Who with? How was your day? But to a teenager, a wall of questions feels like pressure, and pressure makes them close down. As one guide for parents puts it, it's not what you ask, it's what you know. And you learn the most when you're not demanding anything at all. Second, use unintentional time. Teenagers almost never open up on command, face to face, when you sit them down. They open up sideways, in the car, eyes on the road, in the kitchen at midnight, during an activity, shoulder to shoulder. So be there, casually, regularly, available, and let them come to you on their own clock. Third, don't fix, validate. When your teen finally does tell you something hard, the urge to solve it or to minimize it, that's not a big deal. They weren't a real friend anyway. Shuts the door faster than anything. Instead, reflect it back. Wow, that does sound really hard. Feeling understood is what keeps them talking. And fourth, respect the door. Every bit of privacy you grant on purpose is trust you're depositing into an account you'll draw on later. The parents teens actually confide in are the ones who prove they could handle a little distance without falling apart. You're not trying to win them back from their friends. That's not the game. You're trying to stay the one steady place they always know they can return to. So let's go back to that car one more time. The teenager who ran the light with their friends in the back seat wasn't weak, wasn't stupid, wasn't throwing away everything you taught them. Their accelerator was roaring. Their brakes weren't finished. And three friends in the back had quietly flooded the whole system with reward. They did exactly what a healthy teenage brain, right on schedule, is built to do. And that shut door, that hour on the phone, that "I'm fine," it was never rejection. It was a brain doing the most important work of your child's life, becoming a person who can one day leave and be okay. Your job didn't disappear, it changed. You're not the driver anymore. You're the one who taught them to drive and who leaves the porch light on. So the next time your teenager chooses their friends over you, and it stings, because it will, remember what you're actually watching. Not a child pulling away from you, a brain getting ready to leave, exactly the way it was designed to. And if you want to know what's really going on behind that "I'm fine," the specific things you can say that actually get a teenager to open up, that's the next video. And it's simpler than you think.